Here is he wasn't a Republican, then he was a Republican, then he wasn't a Republican.
Actually, he was a Democrat, they say, historically. Then he became a Republican. Then he dropped that identification back in 2007 when he thought he had presidential ambitions.
For independence.
Right.
And now he's still not a Republican, but he's going to run on the Republican line
this all remains to be seen.
If he can get these endorsements as you laid them out.
And it's an incredible turn of events when you think about it, because in the 2001 race, he was very clear that he was running on the Republican Party line for expediency reasons, which is to say he couldn't win in a crowded Democratic field.
As an unknown at that time.
From what we can tell about the thinking of his advisors, they think that winning a Democratic Party primary is still not a sure bet. So he has to turn to these other parties, but it's a very different city than it was in 2001. Then there was this Republican mayor, Giuliani. Of course, there was 9/11 and all of that happened in the course of the election. But I mean, this is probably one of the most indigo places on earth now. I believe something like approaching 80% of the city voted for Barack Obama. It's a town that really became extraordinarily Democrat identified in the last 8 years. And of course, Bush was just, even more unpopular than he was nationally.
Why can't he, especially with his money, run just as an independent? What Republican could actually go up against him on the Republican line and make any impact?
Well, Mr. Catsimatidis is an actual authentic Republican. He's made some moves that appears to look like he's serious.
The owner of the D'Agostino's chain.
And then also would be the independent option, the independent party. That is in kind of an implosion with the state and local at each other, so that line is in dissent. One of the problems is he runs as an independent, unaffiliated person. He, think of it as like a Chinese menu. You'll be way over by oranges and orange sherbet down at the bottom, because we get 4 or 5 people that run as independents irrespective of the party. Right. So he'd be down in this mix.
Line A, line B, line C.
Right, and the way the lines work is the A line is for the governor, the party of the governor in power, and then the major party, and then we have the Conservative Party, you have the Worker Family Party, and the Independence Party. Those are the ones that are, the so-called big-time parties.
But here, for the record, is a clip of the mayor on this program in 2007. I interviewed the mayor live with Greg David of Crane's New York Business at an event that we did together live on the show. Bloomberg had just become a registered independent at that time, and I asked him if there were specific things that he agreed with and disagreed with about what each party stands for.
I don't agree with your fundamental premise. I don't think that I disagree with what any national party stands for, because I don't think that either national party stands for anything. I think the people in those parties stand for things. There isn't any philosophy for a party. When's the last time you saw the platform of either party be tracked out and say, oh, we said 3 years ago at our convention, this is what we stand for? Come on, get serious. That's just to give you something to write about in the middle of a boring convention. There's nothing else. There are people from the far left to the far right in both parties. There are people who I agree with on all of these issues, social issues that you mentioned, and on international issues. And if you want to find somebody in the party that you disagree with, easy to do. You want to find somebody you agree with, easy to do.
So
gives a whole new meaning to the term party rental, and that's what I got pushback from the Republican chairs. They do feel that he has dissed them very publicly, and at this point, the Republican Party, might sound counterintuitive, is feeling kind of feisty, actually. They're liberated from not having Pataki at the top of the ticket or a George Bush, and they had a good week pretty much on the floor of the Senate and House, getting back to basics about fiscal conservatism. So they were not in a mood. I think he's going to have a tough audition.
WNYC's Bob Hennelly, WNYC's Andrea Bernstein. And Andrea, here's another clip of the mayor, but this one is from just yesterday, reacting to the final version of the $789 billion stimulus bill agreed to by Congress. He's talking about all the cuts to the city public schools that he was saying he might have to make.
If the state legislature passes the governor's proposed budget, which took $770 million out of education in the city, I'm happy to report that I think we'll get enough money from Washington to make up for that.
So that's pretty good news. These 14,000 teacher layoffs, that they wouldn't have to come to pass because of the stimulus. He can already say that with confidence?
Well, I would say that was a brave face moment because even as he was at LaGuardia saying this, the Senate and the House had actually yet to agree that they had agreed. The last time I checked, which was shortly before coming on air, there actually were no exact numbers. And one of the big mysteries for the city was whether the final bill would have a House formula for distributing education funds or a Senate formula for distributing education funds. And without getting too technical, the House one favored the New York City. It favored districts with more poor schools. So there was actually some $400 million difference. And last time I checked, the city actually just didn't know. I mean, yesterday was such a dramatic day because Bloomberg went down to Washington with Randy Weingarten to lobby for education funding, for school construction funding. And he had a whole schedule set up, including a meeting with Arlen Specter at 4 o'clock. Well, as we know, Senator Harry Reid stepped out at 3 o'clock to say a deal had been done, to the surprise, it seemed, even of Nancy Pelosi.
That was a bizarre moment. I happened to be watching it on television.
Certainly, right.
It was like he was where's Nancy?
Right, where's
I thought this was a two-house agreement. Oh,
right.
Not yet? Oh,
right.
We're still hammering out details?
Right, and everybody reported there's
Thanks,
a deal. Then they were like, there's no deal. But it seems that even to the surprise of the mayor, and, it does look like this was an effort to sort of, Bigfoot the House, get the Senate version, which, because it has, the Senate version has, I think the total number is 42% tax cuts. That's a big chunk of tax cuts, and all this other spending that the mayors and the governors were hoping for got crowded out. So, Mayor Bloomberg wants a stimulus bill. He wants some of the money. Clearly, he wanted more money than the city will end up getting, even though yesterday he was like, well, tax cuts are great for the city.
There was some, from what I saw when the smoke cleared this morning, there was some sign that in the conference, the Individuals with Disability Education Act did see some additional money. That's good news for cities, particularly because special needs children are very expensive to educate, and that's something the city's been having trouble with. But in general, Andrea's right. We still really don't know how it's worked out, even in terms of the number of police officers we're getting, because one version and the House version is more generous to the city, doesn't require the city to match the money. The Senate version does. So we have to actually literally go over all the small print and compare to see how the legislation came out, each verb, each noun.
So if Mayor Bloomberg had access yesterday, meeting scheduled with Nancy Pelosi and Arlen Specter, which is what you were reporting, Andrea, right?
Well, he had a meeting on his schedule with Arlen Specter. There apparently, from what the reports I'm getting, was a meeting in formation with Speaker Pelosi and a number of local officials that didn't happen.
But these were the top people here, because basically at the end of the day, it was Pelosi bargaining against Arlen Specter, Susan Collins, and Olympia Snow.
And the White House was involved, too.
Somewhat. But maybe, the mayor's famous independence, though leaning maybe slightly toward Republican affiliation, helped him with this access across the aisle to all the power brokers. Bob, that possible?
Well, I think what helped him was, listen, what is budgeting? It's managing expectations. And he certainly got people's attention with the 14,000, 15,000 education slots he was talking about cutting. So anything short of that, and I remember here there was skepticism within the newsroom about when that number first came out. It's all kabuki theater. So what he really had to do is set expectations so low, make things so dire, that anything that he comes back with that's short of that is a victory.